Hi, and welcome to this introduction to SlickEQ M, the new mastering equalizer from Tokyo Dawn Labs. SlickEQ M provides 6 bands of sweet and musical sounding parallel EQ, with optional inductor-style saturation, powerful and flexible low and high pass filters, plus an elliptical filter to force low frequencies to mono, and the Metafilter in the centre, which can provide a simple tilt EQ, or complex hardness or equal loudness curves. Of course, there is nothing to stop you running it on individual channels within a mix. However, SlickEQ M provides powerful ways to manipulate the stereo image, and makes no compromises on quality, which makes it particularly suited for processing stereo buses or full mixes. Let's start at the top and enable the graph display, and turn on the analyzer. These are disabled by default to encourage the use of your ears, but I'll keep them on for this video to help illustrate what I'm doing. The large, inviting Metafilter knob in the centre of the interface is probably the first thing you'll notice. In the default brightness mode, this controls a very linear tilt filter, allowing you to gently lift the highs while dipping the lows, or vice versa. This is very similar to the tilt filter in SlickEQ Gentleman's Edition, except that, like all EQ bands in SlickEQ M, it uses a parallel algorithm. The Metafilter also provides 2 other modes, however. Hardness controls a complex EQ curve, which can produce a more aggressive, forward-sounding mix when turned up, or a softer, smoother mix when turned down. The third option stands for equal loudness curve, and if I turn up the knob, we see a gentle emphasis of the upper mid-range and a rolling off of the extreme high and low frequencies. This curve matches the frequency response of human hearing at low volume levels, sometimes known as a Fletcher-Munson curve after the pioneers of the concept, though this is a more modern version based on more accurate measurements. Turning the knob down instead gives us the opposite response. This reflects the way we perceive the sound when turned up loud, with increased sensitivity to the low and high extremes, and relatively less to the mid-range and upper mid-range. This filter might therefore help to match the sound of 2 songs that were mixed with different monitor levels. If a song was mixed at low volumes, it's likely to have too much of the low and high frequencies that you were less sensitive to, and too little of the upper mid-range that you were more sensitive to. So turning up the volume of our EL curve might help to produce a more balanced mix at normal listening levels. And conversely, if you mixed really loud, try turning the EL curve volume down to compensate. Okay, let's move on to the 6 EQ bands, grouped into 3 bands for the lower frequencies and 3 for higher frequencies. All bands can be switched to a shelving type instead of a bell, with the lower bands providing low shelf options and the upper bands providing high shelves. Like the Metafilter, the EQ bands use parallel algorithms, which helps to make them almost invisibly transparent, even when piling on more gain than is usual in a mastering context. And automatic gain compensation is applied by default, though you can disable this via the EQ gain button at the top if you prefer. Peaking bands feature a proportional Q, which gets narrower as you boost or cut further. More unusually, Q is also linked to frequency, so bands get wider as you go higher and vice versa. Each band also provides a choice of 2 steeper, more surgical settings, or 2 gentler, wider settings, for both bell filters and shelves. Bands also feature powerful stereo image controls. The upper parameter controls the stereo width of the band, so you can selectively widen or narrow the stereo image for different frequencies. This is equivalent to EQing just the side channel in a mid-side setup. If you need to EQ only the mid channel, you can dial in the required mid, cut or boost using the main gain control, then offset it with an equal and opposite change for the side. The lower parameter allows you to shift the balance to the left or right for that band. This is like EQing the left and right channels differently, but with added clever phase compensation so that phase changes don't contradict intensity changes. The width and balance parameters for each band can be used together, and overall master balance and width controls are provided over to the right, allowing very precise control over stereo imaging. Over to the left we find a range parameter, which scales all the band gains behind the scenes, so you can exaggerate your processing, or scale it back to make it more subtle. The range parameter can be automated, of course, so it's easy to fade in your processing for specific sections, or vary the amount of EQ applied for different parts of the song. By default, this range parameter affects both the main EQ bands and the Metafilter in the middle. However, if I double-click the label, it changes to just EQ range, and now doesn't affect the Metafilter at all. The buttons to the left and right of the EQ gains enable inductor-style saturation for the lower bands and the higher bands respectively. The hysteresis symbol on these buttons indicates different behaviour for rising or falling signals, with a memory effect like that found in magnetic analog circuits. The resulting saturation is very musical and program dependent, and can subtly enhance transients as well as adding rich harmonics. The saturation is applied to the parallel filtered band, so the level of the added harmonics will depend on the amount of cut or boost you apply with the EQ. You can also vary the amount of saturation using the nonlinearity fields below each saturation button. Turning these up increases the level of added harmonics, while always staying well short of obvious distortion. Note that the saturation is also different for each band. The two middle bands are cleaner, while the outer bands add progressively more harmonics. The saturation applied to the two highest bands is asymmetric, adding both odd and even harmonics, unlike the symmetrical odd harmonic only saturation of the lower four bands. And each band has its own individual frequency dependencies for the saturation, giving each band a very slightly different flavour. This saturation also benefits from the parallel architecture, as the harmonics added by each EQ band simply sum together in parallel, without being affected by saturation in other bands. And overlapping shelving bands with opposing cuts and boosts can provide a range of different colouring options for the low or high end. When saturating the high frequencies in particular, you may want to consider switching the quality setting to Insane, which increases internal bandwidth for even higher processing quality. If saturation is turned off, however, the default precise mode should be more than adequate. The low-pass filter, called high cut in this case, uses Bessel filter types to reduce phase shifts in the passband. 4 different filter slopes are provided, ranging from 6 to 24 dB per octave. And the cutoff can be set all the way up to 60 kHz if required. At the other end, the low cut filter features a slight bump just above the cutoff, which we can see more clearly if I change the graph scale. And the 4 different filter slopes are carefully tuned to minimise the audible differences when switching between them. We also have another more specialised low-cut filter. The LF mono button engages an elliptical filter to transparently remove stereo content for the lower frequencies and force the sub-bass to mono, with the numeric field below to set the cutoff frequency. Up at the top we find the usual options to load presets, with the usual right-click menu options to save presets, or change the default settings for a new instance, or copy the current preset to the clipboard as a simple text string, which can be pasted back into another instance, or into an email or forum post. We also find A/B buttons so you can compare 2 different settings, and a useful flat button which will reset all EQ gains to unity. Pressing the Learn button to the left will prompt the plug to start analysing the audio. When it's ready, the button will go green, although you can leave it learning for longer if you wish. On pressing stop, the button changes to say action, and we can now apply automatic EQ, which attempts to set the EQ bands and the Metafilter to match the analysed audio to a modified, idealised pink noise spectrum. This feature may not replace an experienced mastering engineer with trained ears, but it can often provide a good starting point, or suggest an alternative approach you may not have otherwise tried. In a similar manner, the action button can be used to automatically set the low and high cut filters to remove out-of-band content. Alternatively, you can save the learned curve as a reference, which will now be available in all other instances of the plug, so I can learn the frequency response of a different song, and then automatically match it to the reference. SlickEQ M provides options for stepped controls, either by right-clicking and dragging, or by holding the Control or Alt key for PC and Mac respectively, or via the settings box, where we can enable stepped mode globally for all instances. Stepped controls are often found in analog mastering gear, as they make recalls much easier. However, limiting parameter changes to sensible increments, such as half dB steps for the gain knobs, can also help to speed up the decision-making process. And you can override it and make finer changes by holding the same modifier key. If you disagree with the choice of increments for any of the parameters, you can edit the SlickEQ M config file, found in App Data on PC or the library folder on Mac. So you can make sure your favourite frequencies are available for the band frequency controls. Or perhaps set up each band with a slightly different choice of frequencies. Okay, I've nearly reached the end of the video. So as a reward for getting this far, I'll let you in on a couple of secret Easter egg features. Double-clicking the logo will subtly randomise the stereo placement for each band, to emulate the slight differences between channels typical of analog EQ. And more fundamentally, holding Control plus Shift and clicking the low-cut filter on will enable a strong phase shift, causing low frequencies to be delayed slightly. This is similar to the Phi function in SlickEQ Gentleman's Edition. The resulting effect will depend very much on the source material. Sometimes the effect is quite subtle and difficult to hear, and sometimes it will make the mix sound worse. But every so often, a group delay applied to the low frequencies can have positive effects. It might help to emphasise the mid and high frequencies and make a mix seem brighter and clearer, or help to prevent the low end from overly dominating the vocal. Or it might extend the decay of the bass and make it seem fuller and deeper. Or it might make the waveform more symmetrical and change the way it hits a limiter downstream. That's all for this video. If you need more information, you can open the user manual via the About box, or enable the pop-up help hints. Thanks for watching.